longtime campaigner's discipline to force himself to relax. Only a fool wasted energy on things he could not control. The enemies would arrive according to their own schedule, no sooner, no later. Their return would be as the Lord's return, like a thief in the night, the day and hour of their coming unknown to even the wisest of men. Instantly regretting the thought, Longchamp crossed himself. Only an inherently evil impulse would drive a man to compare the risen Christ to the heretical Dutch and their sacrilegious contempt for the immortal soul. He wasn't a saint, just a recidivist sinner, like all men. He made a mental note to include this transgression in his weekly confession. Then he fingered the rosary beads looped around his belt and said a quick prayer to the Virgin, begging her to intercede on his behalf. His knees creaked like a lich gate in dire need of oiling when he gained his feet. They never used to do that. Perhaps the aging wasn't entirely an illusion. By the time he ascended another revolution of the cloistered spiral stairwell, the sky glow had brightened sufficiently for Longchamp to extinguish his torch. He shouldn't have used it in the first place. Soon the citadel would be under siege discipline, and then they'd all have to get reacquainted with working in the dark. But the stairs of the porter's prayer could be treacherous at the best of times, not to mention when glazed with frost. He couldn't serve the throne in the church with two shattered legs. The stairs passed beneath the skeletal frame of an unfinished gantry and the tracks of a recently rebuilt funicular. Longchamp's breath frosted the metal tracks as well as the dark insulation wrapped about the pipes that shunted water ballast between the upper and lower cars. He wondered, not for the first time, how they kept the ballast water from freezing. They had 1,000 little tricks, the storied chemists of New France. Tricks that had kept the tulips and their mechanical demons at bay for centuries. That alone was a miracle. But they couldn't keep the upper hand forever. This was the most frightening thought of all, and one he tried to keep to himself, that the long tradition of French chemical innovation would falter or hit a long plateau, and the precarious balance in their centuries-long arms race with the Dutch would irrevocably shift. One day soon the clockwork tide would once again crash against the outer keep of Marseilles-in-the-West. Perhaps this would be the time it swept them away. The final revolution afforded him a grand view of fallow farmland stretching to the west and north, bordered by leagues of winter-bare yellow birch. The St. Lawrence flowed to the east and south of Mont-Royal, upon whose slopes Marseilles-in-the-West sprawled like a lazy cat. Standing atop the spire always made Longchamp feel as though he could see clear across the world, across New France, across the ocean, all the way to Europe and Old France. Longchamp had never seen Paris, of course. He'd only heard family stories passed down from some great-umpty-great-uncle who'd fought for Louis XIV before the exile. By now the pre-dawn light was bright enough for him to see the sentries pacing the star-shaped perimeter of the Vauban fortifications hundreds of feet below. His soldiers, the distressingly few men and women who had survived the last siege and the later massacre inside the walls, paced the inner and outer keeps. They looked like a handful of peppercorns sprinkled across the icy perimeter of the last redoubt of the exiled king of France. They were too few, the perimeter too great. The forced conscriptions weren't bringing in new bodies quickly enough. Longchamp made another mental note, this time to speak to the Comte de Turenne, who carried the Marshal General's baton. A renewed breeze fluttered Longchamp's beard, drew tears from his eyes, snaked through buttonholes and seams. But the exertion of the climb had warmed him enough that the icy streamers didn't stipple him with gooseflesh. And later, when he wore armor and fought for his life,